Thank you so much, Sue. I feel the need to come out as someone who wasn't brought up in a new town. That was fantastic. I mean, really, all four of you have done such a good job of providing this foundation for today's discussion. Thank you so much. And I love this idea, Sue, about the sense of place rather than creating or placemaking or a sort of going beyond the top-down diktats of the marketing team. And also the lovely idea, that the reminder that placemaking goes beyond public sculpture to encompass culture in its broadest terms. And you were talking about that earlier, about the music scene and the mini woodland. That was lovely. Nature is a dynamic outdoor art form. I'm loving that. That's great. Okay, so we've got about, I think, 10-15 minutes for discussion. We'll take some questions from you in a minute, but I just wanted to ask you, Alina and Kate, maybe to talk a little bit about the mechanisms that Harlow Arts Trust has in place to maintain this incredible collection, and why it is that we still have it today, and how it was kind of drawn up originally from the 50s and 60s.
And that's something we're also very interested in exploring. So I guess in the past we've been very dependent on public funding to support that. And we're now looking at what alternative approaches there are. So we're very fortunate in having Heritage Lottery funding, which is paying for some of the restoration of our key works at the moment. But we're aware that we need to develop a wider range of funding models go forward to support public art. So Kate, do you want to say something about the Section 106 stuff that we're...
So we work with developers as sort of commissioning agents to help them fulfil their Section 106 requirements. So that's one of the ways in which we kind of build the collection, and then our Artist in Residence programme as well, because they can donate work to the collection as well.
But the work was, as far as I understand it, is established within a trust. It's all owned. Can you talk a bit about the ownership of the
about
works?
60% of the works are owned by Harlow Art Trust.
Yeah.
A number of others are owned by the council, and then there are kind of individual commissions that happen through, like the Health Centres Trust, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the very early 1950s, they had a £250 grant, I believe, from the Elm Grant Trust, and that kind of got them the family group, and from there they kind of built on very small grants, but also public subscription for a short time, I think.
But as we're finding out now, not a lot of thought went at an early stage into either commissioning or purchasing pieces and thinking about their long-term future. So the Wrestlers example, which is in the cement foundry, which is causing us headaches now, when that piece was being purchased, no one was thinking about in 40 or 50 years' time about trustees and them having to maintain it or repair it. So pieces were bought for a whole range of reasons, supporting young artists, fitting a local community, themes that relate to new towns, but their long-term maintenance and preservation was not on the agenda when they were being bought and being commissioned.
And this idea of temporary and permanent works, all of the works that you were talking about this morning most of them have a sense of sort of permanency about them. We talked about how important they were in relation to people's lived everyday experience of these artworks. I'm just thinking, do you have any sort of personal views about whether works, commissioning programs today should have a kind of permanent or temporary legacy, or whether that is useful in any way?
The exhibition that we have at the moment in the gallery, we've asked people to take a photograph of Harlow, and within that to make an intervention. So people who have placed objects and related to our work. So for example, you'd have one of our prize sculptures, and the sculptor's holding a mobile phone, and they'll photograph that, and that will be their submission. So we very much encourage people to, through that exhibition, to make, in that case, very temporary interventions and to relate to our collection in that way.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got to open this up to the floor, because I know you've all been sitting there for an hour and a half. Now, do we have mics, or I forgot to ask what the code? Okay, so we have a roaming mic. Thank you. We've got a few questions at the back.
First speaker, right, okay. Thank you very, very much. That was really interesting. Everything, there's so many things that have come out there. I'm going to take back to sunny Basildon, where me and my colleague are working as trustees for the Foundation for Essex Arts. And what I've noticed is that although we've actually managed to do things, we've had a Basildon Heritage Trail that was developed. And there was signposting, and in the past there's also been a huge sculptures put up in a local park. Those things, what's happened is they've appeared, money's been got to get them there, and after that the council just seemed to think they're magically going to stay exactly the same, that they won't age, that somehow they're going to just exist forever, because they don't then put in any provision for maintenance or care of these objects at all. And it's only recently they've started to sort of turn their eyes towards thinking they ought to try and save some things. But if you look at old pictures of our town, huge things have just disappeared and nobody knows where they've gone. They've just come off the sides of buildings, they've just gone. And so Basildon now is sort of scrambling back and starting to think about culture, and I mean that really recently. I'm talking months. I'm not talking years, months. They've just started thinking about the culture. So listening to you people is wonderful and exciting that you've made some efforts to go. But my question is, what do you think is the biggest thing that you can say to a council to get them to actually live up to the expectations of the people in their town, that they will look after the environment that they live in, and that includes the art and the culture? How can you persuade these people who just seem to be, frankly, Philistines, most of them? Sorry.
You could say it's not going to cost you very much money, because, like, when I interviewed a person who's now responsible for the woodland in Birchwood, who works for Warrington Borough Council, who himself grew up in Birchwood, he moved from Salford, and he kind of said, we're talking about we're talking about, you know, living with this austerity agenda and everything, but he said, you're talking about, you know, maintenance of trees is not massively expensive on this scale, and he said, to take away our budget will create a kind of havoc and overgrown vegetation and stuff, but to just keep the small amount of money we get, we could keep things in control, sort of thing. So can we please rethink this, taking away these small bits of money? I mean, you know, you're talking about like signage and kind of like possibly like, you know, relating to maybe a website or something. I mean, that's not a huge amount of money, is it? You know, and I wonder if he said that that's the argument that he makes to his superiors is we're talking about small budgets. But I don't think that's the case with a lot of maybe the kind of infrastructure that, well, the sort of sculptural stuff maybe, I don't know.
And I think that's where some of the models I think are quite interesting. So the model that you have here in Milton Keynes of the Parks Trust, that you have a sound financial model in the first place for the management of those assets. Yeah. That's a bit kind of late now, but as a way of which you're supporting those things, the Parks Trust model.
And that's
here
maybe
Milton
what we
Keynes
have to think about instigating now in the current day, that type of model. But I think a lot of it is based on short-termism. There's a sense that actually, of course, we know there is evidence to say that all of this activity will contribute a huge amount to people's ideas of their sense of their place in the world, where they've been, where they're going, you know. But we're so bad at kind of bringing all of that information together and selling it to these council members. Okay, we've got more questions. Sorry, Katy.
I was just going to add to that because I think it's really, really important. I think it's fundamental to everything we're going to be talking about today. And just to answer your question, I think it's about convincing the council that investing in art and culture is as important as investing in roads and trees and schools and all of these things. They're just as essential part of people's life, but also that the resources are there to pay for them with the right stewardship models in place. And yes, you need to think about it right from the beginning. We'll talk about that more, but particularly it needs to be a corporate commitment from the council so that it's embedded right from the outset. And it's not just Section 106, it's community infrastructure levy. Funds can be directed to the stewardship of the public art and all sorts of things. The money is there if we have the right structures to access it.
I would agree with what's been said. My name is Shane Downer. I'm actually Milton Keynes Council. I'm the heritage officer there. And I think, yes, definitely the council does have a role to play. And as a team, within the culture team, we have been looking at ways in which the public art can be protected for future generations. And we have been looking at things like how Section 106 coming forward, a percentage of that can be used to look after the existing public art in terms of conservation and maintenance. But it is very difficult, and in a lot of cases, those local authorities have inherited those collections from development corporations. A lot of the infrastructure around Milton Keynes, the public art, is actually in other ownership than the council. It's in private ownership. It's in ownership in terms of the Parks Trust has been mentioned. So I don't think it's as easy solution as people make out. It's not just about the council, it's about other stakeholders across the city and having a proper strategy and a plan for it as well. We're very lucky in Milton Keynes because developers since the early days have acknowledged that a percent for art, and we do have a planning policy around percent for art in Milton Keynes. So we have more money than most to be able to look at these kinds of issues. But I think it needs a discussion at a city level and not just the local authority expected to find the solutions. It needs those other stakeholders, including the public art trusts, around the table to look at how we can find the funding to protect what are important heritage assets. And in Milton Keynes, we have over 200 pieces of public art, many of which we as a council are still discovering on a daily basis when someone cuts some undergrowth down and there's a piece of public art there. So, I mean, that's the kind of things that we need to think about. And the other point that was made, whether that public art is actually permanent or temporary, and considering that we may have to gracefully retire some of these pieces because they're actually past redemption in some cases, and that's unfortunate. But we have to be realistic about what we can protect going forward, but also what we should gracefully retire. And that's where archives and heritage comes in, because then you can document what is there, including the social story of people's interaction with those public art, and then gracefully retire them. Thank you.
I'm all up for a good bit of graceful retirement and acknowledging that, you know, you've got that the artworks have a certain lifespan and things can't forever go on.
And that's something that's very interesting about our Restless piece, bringing that indoors. Has really helped to fuel a debate around that. So we're able to have a discussion with our gallery visitors around when do you keep things? Are things supposed to be there forever? You know, do we want these works still to be there in 100 years or 1,000 years' time? Or does the cement fondue, does it have a finite life to it? And bringing that piece indoors that's very troubled, I think has helped us have some of those discussions. I think I find it quite problematic that it's a piece by a woman artist who was early in her career. I think if it was a Henry Moore piece, we wouldn't be thinking about it twice, maybe paying to restore it. So I think there are issues about perhaps work by women artists who perhaps didn't get the status and the recognition that some of their male contemporaries have. But if we looked at it with fresh eyes, would we see that as actually having the same artistic value as work by some of their male contemporaries?
I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it, as well, particularly with architecture as well and changing architectural fashions. And, you know, 1950s architecture is being recognised and is, you know, fashionable, and people are excited about it and want to go on tours to visit it and that kind of thing. And it's really interesting when we were looking at Harlow, you know, you had the picture of Eve in front of Nando's, and that was moved as a result of the water gardens were moved in the 90s, wasn't it? Was it the 90s? Yeah, and now 2000s, and now overlook a huge Asda car park. But I think what's important is the council is now recognising they need to think longer term. So the town centre, the work behind the town centre strategy, the sort of heritage assessment recognises that the town hall, which used to be sort of closer to where the water gardens originally were, was demolished because it was seen as you know, unfashionable and unsuitable and redundant. And now they're recognising that actually perhaps that was a mistake. And there's a really interesting cautionary note in there to say we need to try and understand what the sort of future values of these of this architecture.
And in order to do that, just to go back to your first point, we need a really powerful, strong visionary leadership in the cultural industries to do that. I think we can have as many strategies or kind of systems in place to make these things happen, but they won't happen unless you have the gibbards, the people at the, in positions of power to fight for culture and for the, the place of art and woodland and, the everyday experience in the public realm.
Could I just come back about the point about it's not just the council's responsibility and stuff? Because I think it goes back to kind of fragmentation of housing in a way, because what you've got is one of the stakeholders is going to be housing associations in a lot of new towns, and it is in Warrington. And like, in terms of thinking about, what's going to last forever, a housing association is basically like a market actor. It's not going to last forever, or it's going to change its focus, or it's going to change its investment strategy and stuff. And that's why, I was talking about what was given to the people was this kind of bit of poxy plastic for children to play on that wasn't going to last, because that was basically funded by a housing association that's kind of hedging its bets all the time about, like, do we stay in Birchwood, do we stay in Warrington, do we focus on Manchester and so on. So it kind of goes back to a sort of fragmentation of, like, the housing market and kind of just the sort of economy as a whole in terms of, like, who the stakeholders now are. It's the days of, just going to the council are very much over. I agree with that. It would make things simpler if you could just go to the council and say it's your job. But there's, that's kind of one of the ongoing issues, I think.
That fragmentation of ownership was also one of the results of the way the corporations and the programme was wound up. There's real fragmentation of ownership in all of the new towns. And that's one of the reasons that the town centres are so challenging, because most of them were sold off to the private sector, so the council don't have the ability to, in the same way, to renew them. And places like Stevenage are now buying back some of the premises within the town centre to enable them to do that. And there are parts of Peterlee where even the council and the town council have no idea who owns them, and people are coming saying, get these motorbikes off this patch of green space, and they're like, we don't know who's in control of it. And I think that fragmented ownership. One of the things we've been looking at through our work on New Town Renewal is the potential role of new community-led, a new form of community-led development corporation specifically for the regeneration process, to enable local authorities to perhaps buy back some of those assets and have more control over them.
Thank you so much. We've been told we have to stop now, but I salute all of you. You've done an incredible job. We all want to hear more, and we're all really keen to hear how the day is going to pan out and all of this can be taken on into the 21st century. Thank you so much.
Thank you.